So I know Venerable Chinny, after her mother died, gave a few talks about death. So I hope I'm not repeating what she said, because I wasn't here when she gave those talks. But another thing I was thinking about, because I've been receiving many emails and cards of people expressing their condolences, and also at the memorial service and the funeral and the reception, many people express their condolences. And I can see a difference between the way people who are Buddhists and people who aren't Buddhist express this. The people who aren't Buddhist usually say, I give my condolences and I'm sorry about your loss. Yeah. And the people who are Buddhists say, I will, do pujas and make prayers for your father. Yeah. So it's very different, And for me, because the people at the memorial service and so on were not Buddhist, it was kind of strange for me to hear people saying, oh, I'm so sorry about your loss, because I was okay. And my thoughts were more with my father, because he's the one who died. And at this very moment, he's the one who faces more danger, than I do, in the sense that he's, undergoing the death process or in the bardo. Of course, in terms of all of samsara, I'm in as much danger as he is. But in terms of this very moment, what's happening in our lives, and so I've always had the feeling that when somebody dies, or when somebody is dying, the focus should be on the person who's dying, or the person who died, not on the person who is surviving, because the person who's dying is the one having the more unusual experiences and so on. But so often in society, because people don't have the notion of past and future lives, it's like they don't talk about what happens after death. It's like death is just this end, and in expressing their good wishes, they don't know what to say, unless they say, oh, he's in heaven, or something like that, which, they mean well when they say that, but of course, yeah, that doesn't jive with my perspective. Yeah, and so it's interesting to watch this, and at the same time, be aware that when people express their condolences to me or feel sorry about my loss, this is not something for me to get uptight about or upset about, because they're saying what they're saying with a kind heart, and they're concerned about me, which, when somebody's concerned about you, what can you just say? Thank you so much, I'm really grateful. But at the same time, my thought is, oh, it's my dad who should be the focus of our attention right now. Yeah. I've seen in some situations where I've, been called in at end of the life times, and I remember one situation in particular where they called me to talk to the person who was dying. I spent over an hour there, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, but only 5 minutes with the person who were dying, because the rest of the family, they had so much need at that time that I couldn't get to the person who was in the most fearful situation. Yeah. But of course, who's ever in front of you at that moment that needs help, you give them the help they need. But, I wanted to be able to express more to the person who was actually dying, but I couldn't get there so easily. Yeah? Yeah. And sometimes, actually, if you ease the mind of the family and friends, then you're actually helping the person who's dying, because then they don't have to take care of that person. You know, because that happens sometimes too. If the family and friends are upset, then the person who's dying can't concentrate on their own process, because they have to reassure the rest of the family and the friends. Yeah, which, you know, it would be nice if we could put our attention, you know, where it belongs and help the people who really need it at that moment. But of course that isn't always what happens, is it? Samsara is not neat and tidy and does not go as planned unless you plan for chaos and suffering, which is, you know, actually realistic expectations out of samsara. Which is why this whole thing is a good motivation to get out of samsara and not to continue this kind of thing anymore. Yeah, so you're saying that this is an interesting take, because before you thought, well, they're gone, so nothing I can do, so let's take care of the living. Of course the living need taken care of. You know, I'm not saying we should ignore the living, but the person who died is the one in the bardo at that time. Yeah, so it really is quite a different way of thinking. Okay, so this is something you've seen as a nurse, and I've experienced going in to help too, is that when the family is really holding on to the person, it's very difficult for them to die, even if they're unconscious. You know, it's hard for them to die. And it's when the family leaves and goes to sleep or goes to eat that then they have the space to focus on their own process and do what they need to do at that moment. And that's when they die. Yeah? And so I often tell people, if you aren't there when your dear one dies, that's not a problem. In fact, in many ways, it's good. Yeah, because there's no one there to distract them and no one there for them to hold on to. In the case of my dad, you know, he was surrounded by family members and all. I think that he went so quickly from choking that he didn't have time even to have the thought, oh, I'm dying, which is probably better, because in his case he was terrified of death. And having that thought would have spun him into, you know, a lot of fear. So, you know, not having that thought makes no fear, but, you know, at least it doesn't provoke that immediate fear. And what you say is really true, that people want to help, and they do sympathize and empathize with the survivors, but there's no real language, so they, you know, to express what they're feeling, so they say what they do. And I think in those situations, it's important that we tune in to the feeling of compassion and empathy that the person is expressing, even if the language they use doesn't suit us, or even if what they say may, you know, be insensitive in one way or another, you know, because I've heard some people say that, you know, sometimes what people say to somebody who's grieving just isn't appropriate, and they get upset about it. But I think at those times, really, if we can look past that, because it's really not about us, and it's not about the literal language, it's about the person expressing their care and concern for the living at that time. And if we can tune into that and say thank you, you know, that's what we need to do. Instead of, excuse me, can you please use this wording rather than that wording, you know? Okay. Yeah, so you're saying even sometimes, like maybe there's unfinished business, and so people who are expressing you know, their condolences what they say may really be quite, who knows what, you know, even inappropriate. But what you're saying is behind that, there's actually goodwill, you know. Yeah, they want to connect, and that's the important thing. Yeah, they don't have the skills to connect, even though they want to. And so, in that situation, for us to make it easy for them to connect, yeah, and see, you know, really read what they're really trying to say underneath all the whatever. Okay, so an example of what you're talking about is what somebody said to you after your mom died. Now you must be relieved because your parents are together in heaven. And it's like, well, you know, for you as a Buddhist, but they're meaning well, yeah? And so to tune into the meaning well, instead of getting into a big philosophical debate at that time. Yeah, so when somebody has died, do our prayers and well wishes and something have some effect? Within the 49 days that they are potentially in the bardo, yes. And that's why, like on the 7th, 14th, 21st, and so on days, we especially create merit and dedicate for them, because if they haven't found the body for the karma that's ripened so far, then they undergo a little bardo death and take another bardo body. And so since at that time there's the possibility for the karma that can shift, if we create merit and dedicate it for them, it could influence, you know, the state of their mind so that a more virtuous karma could ripen. Yeah. Are they aware of that? Who knows? I have a feeling that they're much more focused on their present experience in the bardo, and yet, you know, we do influence each other in many nonverbal ways even while we're alive, don't we? Yeah. So it can have some effect. Yeah? Yes, actually, this is a very important point. That it's really important that the family members and the people who know the person are, you know, create virtue and make the prayers, because they have the strongest karmic link with the person. Often what people do is they make a donation to a monastery or so on and say, please make prayers for my relatives. And of course that's virtuous and that's good, but even better is to do the practices and prayers oneself, because one's own strong karmic connection is the strongest thing. And that the practice of exchanging self and others enables us to focus on the dying person. Yeah, that's quite important.